Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin at the top of the hour, and it will be recorded. Connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use the hashtag GLReading or hashtag Learning Tuesdays, and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's conversation, and we'll be sure to retweet it. We strongly encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. So once again, connect with the campaign on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. The webinar will begin shortly. It will be recorded and sent to you afterwards.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started because I have 3 p.m. Eastern Time staring at me from my computer. Welcome to our webinar today, and thank you for joining GLR Learning Tuesdays. And today's webinar is How Public Media is Helping Parents Overcome the Digital Divide. My name's Emily Samos, and I'm a consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and I'm stepping in to manage a few sessions in this online learning series focused on the Learning Loss Recovery Challenge. And before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple of the quick housekeeping details. So first, I encourage you, if you haven't yet, to use the chat box function to introduce yourself, sharing your name, your organization, and your city or your GLR community. And when you do, make sure you go ahead and select all panelists and attendees so that everyone can know who we have with us today. As you're probably used to from other webinars, all attendees will be in listen-only mode during the webinar to avoid any background noises and distractions during the presentations. But we welcome you to post your questions, any questions you may have during the presentations in the Q&A box. So we really ask you to please use the Q&A box versus the chat for your questions, because that helps us kind of get them lined up when we have time later in the presentation for the Q&A. I also wanted to remind you that today's webinar is being recorded, and that a link to that recording will be sent to all who registered in a follow-up email that will go out later this week. Also wanted to give you a heads up that towards the end of the session, we're going to be posting a brief "What did you think?" survey poll after all the presentations to capture your feedback, and we highly encourage you to take just a few moments to respond, because this helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. And also, you know, you're going to notice that there's going to be several links posted in the chat as throughout the presentation, and all of those links will be captured in that follow-up email that you'll receive as well. So, you know, feel free to click on them and explore stuff while we are proceeding, but rest assured that you'll get those later as well. So just quick background on GLR Learning Tuesdays. We do these every Tuesday at 3 p.m. and the idea is to have this sort of predictable and reliable schedule to make it easier for you all to plan to join this for this robust series of learning opportunities. And we've now hosted over 40 webinars since the launch of GLR Learning Tuesdays last September. And I encourage you to visit CLIP, which is the campaign's Community Learning for Impact and Improvement platform, to find the growing archive of resources from these online conversations that explore the best science, ideas, and programs for our work to ensure early school success for more children from low-income families. And also, the GLR Learning Tuesdays channel on CLIP was recently reorganized with separate folders for each session, where you can find the recording, the slides, and related resources. So everything that you're going to see posted will be all saved in the CLIP. So we encourage you to check that out. And as you can see on the screen, we have a couple of additional great sessions planned for the upcoming weeks. And so again, we encourage you to join CLIP, and the link is in the chat box so you can find it. And make sure to register for some of our upcoming sessions. And so now for today's conversation, this whole month we've engaged in what we've been calling the Learning Loss Recovery Challenge series. So this is lifting up the issue of learning loss to acknowledge and confront the very real threat presented by the COVID-19 learning slide. Earlier in the series, we had a session titled Underconnected Yet Eager to Learn, Confronting Digital Inequities, where we learned that as many as 12 million US children do not have broadband internet at home. And data from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance show that in 462 US cities, 20% of households or greater are underconnected. And so you can imagine how much of a challenge this is during the pandemic, when all teachers are expected to deliver their core curriculum through virtual learning. And so it's especially a challenge for early learners who are just starting to gain early literacy skills. So the good news is that public media provides a solution to this crisis and responded immediately when schools closed by developing programming to support the continuity of learning and partnering with school systems to create schedules and programs that align with curriculum. So innovative PBS stations across the country have always provided resources for parents and families and have now been able to leverage those innovative tools to allow parents to engage their children in at-home learning without the need for broadband. So today we're going to hear from PBS leaders from both the national and local levels about the programming they are delivering and how they are partnering with school systems to help parents overcome the digital divide. And so now I get the great pleasure of introducing our amazingly stellar lineup of presenters and community commentators for today. So first we've got Sarah DeWitt, and she is the Vice President of PBS Kids Digital, where she oversees streaming video apps, educational games, and digital experiences for kids and parents with the goal of making PBS Kids content engaging and accessible to widely diverse audiences. Sarah was previously a preschool teacher and has studied the media habits of children in rural areas. We also have Sarah Schapiro, so we've got two Sarahs kicking us off today, and she is the Vice President for Education at PBS, where she leads efforts to deepen partnerships across the education sector by engaging directly with educator communities and launching new initiatives. And previously, she helped found Digital Promise, which some of you may have already worked with, which is an organization that spurs innovation and improves opportunities to learn. So our community commentators today include Susie Grimm, who is the Director of Early Learning with PBS SoCal, and she develops and implements innovative education initiatives such as STEM parent curricula and a series of bilingual parent engagement workshops. And she continues to build mutually beneficial relationships between PBS SoCal and the whole Southern California community. Just a small job. We have Jamie Myers, and she's the Chief Operating Officer at PBS SoCal, where she is responsible for oversight of daily operations and provides strategic direction across all aspects of the organization. In her previous role as Vice President of Education and Community Engagement, she expanded the breadth and depth of PBS SoCal's educational and cultural grassroots outreach across Southern California as well. We also have Kierstan Schwab, who serves as the Executive Director of Texas PBS. And under her guidance, the 10 Texas stations build collaboration with each other and partners to provide educational media and services to parents, schools, and communities. And she directs the association's partnerships with the Texas Education Agency and was appointed by the governor to the Texas Early Learning Council. And finally, we have Debbie Stack, who is Vice President of Education and Community Engagement at WCNY, which is Central New York's public media organization in Syracuse. And she oversees WCNY's educational initiatives, including Enterprise America, a financial literacy and business entrepreneurship program, as well as school vacation programs and the Ready to Learn programming for young learners. So again, our powerhouse panel, we have a lot to learn today. And so I'm gonna go ahead and get started with our panelists and start with Sarah and Sarah to kind of gain your national perspective. And I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about how PBS Kids is positioned to respond to the digital divide and how your signature resources such as PBS Kids and PBS Learning Media have been used by parents and families during these past few months of COVID-19.
So hi everyone, this is Sarah DeWitt. So I'll kick us off. And it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to be with, as Emily said, this powerhouse panel of public media professionals. It's really great to be here. So definitely, if you want to go to the next slide, PBS has been in the early learning space for a very long time. This is very familiar territory for us. And for 50 years, this is our 50th anniversary, we've really been committed to creating content for early learners that will help them gain success in school and in life. So I feel like we have talked a lot at PBS about how we have had this strategy of trying to really educate and engage early learners and their families for such a long time. And when the shutdown took place, we realized we were kind of uniquely poised to act in this moment, to be present and to be available for families. So in that first month of the shutdown, more than 19 million children, their parents tuned in to PBS local stations during at-home learning hours, and 20 million parents, children, and educators engaged with our digital content. Children are increasingly engaged with our content. We've seen a 6% gain in ratings over this time period, a 43% gain in ratings for older kids, 9 to 17-year-olds, and a 23% in gain, 43, excuse me, in 9 to 17-year-olds, and 23% engagement in streaming. We've also seen a 40% engagement increase in gameplay. And so we'll talk more about that in a minute. The downloads of our free apps, the PBS Kids Video app and the PBS Kids Games app, have increased over 70% during this time.
And I'm thrilled to be here too, Sarah Schapiro. Sarah D and I talk about this mnemonic. Sarah DeWitt, D for digital, Sarah Schapiro, S for schools. So if you have questions later, you can send them to Sarah Digital or Sarah Schools if you'd like. So I think just to continue on the amazing stats that Sarah just shared, we're also seeing a ton of traffic on our PBS Learning Media platform, which is our flagship platform for educators. So we're reaching about 4 million users a month, and previously it was about 1 million users per month. So it's been a 400% increase in users looking for educational content around public media. And I would say, something we're going to talk about, our stations will talk about a little later, is PBS member stations were amazingly nimble and quickly stood up at-home learning broadcast solutions using PBS media to sort of approximate what students might be learning during the spring semester had they been in school, to address this digital divide where kids didn't necessarily have access at home. So this includes sequence content that they'll talk about that they organize by grade band and subject, TV classroom, and other innovative solutions for families who did not have internet. So that'll be down the webinar a bit, where they'll be sharing those ideas. Next slide, please.
So I mentioned earlier that we felt like we were kind of uniquely positioned to be able to address this time with parents being at home with young kids and looking for content for them. And a lot of it is based on this model. And this is a model we've had in place for quite some time. We call it the learning ecosystem, and it's something we go back to regularly as we think about the content we create. It guides not only the content we create, but also the ways in which we distribute that content. I'll talk about that in a minute. And the ways that we try to build supports to drive engagement with that content. So the thing to note here is that the child is in the center. So everything we do at PBS Kids when we're creating content, we're thinking first and foremost about that child and how the content can make a difference in their lives. So we have a lot of research, 50 years of research going back to Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, more recently to Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood and Peg Plus Cat. Research that shows that children who watch our shows actually can experience learning gains on the skills that are introduced in those shows. But we also know that those skills grow even more if children watch a show and play a digital game. And they grow even more if a child interacts with a grown-up around that content at the same time.
And on the grown-up piece, just to jump in here, as you'll see in the learning ecosystem map, we also have teachers and parents and parents and caregivers and family members. And the idea here is, again, the kid is at the center of what we do, but we're also creating contextual materials for teachers, for parents, for families, so that they can use the media with their kids to drive learning. And so, what we are doing is often thinking about what do grown-ups need in order to use these media tools better and differently. And I would say the other piece of it is our community and station. So we're pleased to be joined by, all of our public media colleagues here today. And the idea is everything we do is situated in neighborhoods, communities where kids live and learn. And the idea is that our stations are the local experts on the ground who help take the PBS media we're creating nationally and bring it to life with kids, families, and educators on the ground. So that's the learning ecosystem. Next slide, please.
That is so great. And I wanted to hear a little bit more building off of that about how curriculum is baked into each PBS Kids series and sort of what is the PBS Kids approach to making this work?
So curriculum really is the center. I mean, it's where we kind of start. I know that if you talk to anyone in our programming division, they'll say, we never accept a show and then try to put curriculum on top of it. We really start with the curriculum is so central to what the show needs to be, that the show couldn't exist without that curriculum. That's the way we approach it. And that is pretty unique within the children's media landscape. So the slide you have in front of you here is the map that we refer to pretty regularly when we think about where our shows fit within across the curriculum for kids between the ages of 2 to 8. We develop a series of learning frameworks. We use national and state standards, but we also gather together groups of advisors and experts in different subject matter experts areas to help us really understand what is developmentally appropriate for each of these curriculum areas for a child at 2 versus 3 versus 4. How might we build on a curriculum not only within linear narrative, but also in an interactive experience where kids can be actually doing some input in a game. So these frameworks are some things that we give to producers as they begin building shows for PBS Kids. It's also something that we all refer to in the office pretty regularly when we think about messages that we're giving to parents, when we think about things that we're developing for educators, always referring back to what are exactly the skills we're trying to introduce and what's the most age appropriate way to introduce them. If you want to continue to the next slide, I mentioned that we're talking about the curriculum, but we also are thinking very carefully about how we are distributing this content and how we are making sure that we're getting to as many kids as possible. So our strategy has always been to be as accessible as possible and to be where kids are. So certainly the local PBS channel is the place where the majority of kids find our content. And we know that we reach more low-income households than any other children's broadcaster, any other media network. In addition to that TV presence, we do have a really robust digital presence. We have mobile apps, we have a website. We are thinking though, when we're building these, not just about the latest technologies that kids are using, but the fact that most kids are using hand-me-down technology, and lower income kids usually have second or third generation hand-me-down. So when you download a PBS Kids app, it is likely to work on a much older device than many of the apps that you interact with every day. And that is very deliberate on our part. The other thing that we do is think about how kids might go in and out of Wi-Fi. So the PBS Kids Games app, for example, has over 200 games on it. And you can download those games to the app when you're in Wi-Fi and then leave and play those games without any connection. And the next time you come in, refresh the games. Again, built very deliberately in that way so that kids don't have to have a persistent broadband connection. The one other thing I want to point out on this slide is the 24/7 channel. In 2017, PBS Kids made the decision with our member stations and in partnership with our member stations to build a new 24-hour television channel for kids. In 2017, that sounded like a pretty crazy thing to do. Certainly none of our commercial competitors were thinking about doing more television. But the reason was, as we looked at the ways that kids' viewing habits worked, we could tell that lots of kids were watching television in the hours when we didn't have content that was appropriate for them on. When our member stations had moved to the news hour and to programming for grown-ups. And so we launched a 24/7 channel and immediately saw a huge boost, particularly in lower income kids watching later at night. And so this is a critical piece of our strategy, making sure that we're accessible where kids are. You can go to the next slide. I want to give a little bit of an example, again, of this model and how we think about development of content. So Molly of Denali is a show that launched last summer. It's produced by WGBH in Boston. And it's the first nationally distributed children's series to feature a Native American lead. So Molly Mabray is a Native Alaskan. And this show was built with Native Alaskan voices throughout the entire production, both in front of the camera, in voiceover, and behind the camera, and also in the writer's room and in production. The show itself is focused on an informational text curriculum. So thinking about how kids engage with words outside of regular kind of books, but more like words in their environment. If you go to the next slide, we worked with, we created the video content with WGBH, but we also then worked with the same advisors and the same Native Alaskan advisors to develop games that would build on that same curriculum and to build offline activities that would support that same curriculum, so that a child could watch a show, play a game, do an offline activity with a parent or a grown-up. And then also we developed a lot of additional parents content to introduce this skill area and curriculum area to grown-ups so that they can engage with kids together. So every show we do, every show we produce, we think about this process. What are all the transmedia ways we can be supporting that content? Next slide.
And then, okay, there we go. And within that, we are thinking about, we have this sort of model of how we think about all of our content and all of the offerings that we have. So, and we think about it in a pyramid, and I know our station colleagues think about it similarly, where, we have our broadest reach, the kinds of things that Sarah D was just describing, with our PBS Kids 24/7 channel, with our PBS Kids television on the main feed, with our web games and apps. And then if you look at the blue part of this pyramid, then we're thinking about how are we taking this media and creating opportunities for more targeted engagement with parents, with families, with educators. How are we creating resources around this media to further enhance the learning and the teaching that is happening? And so that's really this blue part of the pyramid. And then at the top of the pyramid, the green part, it's really where we are partnering most directly with stations for targeted community engagement. Programs that we do that PBS does in person, well, not in person right now, but does with communities, with families, for educators, trainings, and other stuff that is much more intensive. But again, the through line here is our media. And so that is really how we're thinking about this. And a show like Molly, you'll see Molly there with the pyramid, a show like Molly, really, that sort of media is carried throughout this pyramid in terms of how we think about our work. Next slide, please.
Yeah, we would love to hear a little bit more about how you are leveraging these great resources and putting things together for kids, parents, and educators, specifically during the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you could talk a little bit more about that, that'd be great.
Yes, so the model that we just shared, trying to create different kinds of content that can be used together in a package, that allowed us to immediately be able to put a newsletter out. We launched this on March 16th, so right as stay-at-home orders were going into place. A newsletter that then parents could receive each morning that would give them a bundle of content to do together. Because we had all these shows and games and offline activities mapped to the skill areas, we could say, okay, it's literacy day, here's the show to watch, here's a game to play, here's a conversation to have, here's an offline activity. And immediately got that out. In the first weekend, I think we had 70,000 people sign up for this newsletter. The next slide. We also were able to then really activate our social media presence. We have lots of book authors and producers who were really excited to do something live for kids at this time. And we definitely were hearing from parents that they were looking for kind of events that they could participate in with their kids. So some of our show stars, like Martin Kratt here from the Wild Kratts, did a live reading of one of their books. After we did a few things with like the author of Arthur, Mark Brown, we also, Michelle Obama did a series of read-alongs for us through our social media channels. And then Christian Robinson over here on the right debuted his brand new book, You Matter, just a couple of weeks ago. On this PBS Kids read along. So we were able to use that platform to reach as many parents as we could really rapidly. And then Sarah S. will tell you a little bit more about what we've done for educators.
Thanks. Next slide, please. So our content for educators. So we, as I mentioned earlier, we have our flagship platform called PBS Learning Media, which is a place where we offer teachers free anytime access to almost 30,000 classroom-ready, standards-aligned public media resources. It's a partnership with WGBH, our member station in Boston, and we create clips of media and teaching resources, including sort of guiding questions, interactives, activities, things like that, for everything from Daniel Tiger to Wildcrats, as Sarah mentioned, to Peg Plus Cat, to Ken Burns and Nova for older kids. And so the media is really a jumping off point for learning, and we've created integrations with Google Classroom, Clever, the ways that teachers and schools are actually consuming media and using digital and online resources. So this has obviously been a huge resource in this at-home learning sort of scenario. We are again reaching about 4 million users a month, and we've created collections about the virus itself. We've created collections that were sort of scoped and sequenced by grade band and by subject area, so that educators could get media to help illustrate core concepts that they would be teaching and kids would be learning in the spring semester. Printable resource, we've created a whole collection of printable resources, and we're figuring out how to continue this sort of support into the fall. But again, as Sarah mentioned earlier, we were sort of well positioned. It's weird to say with a pandemic, but we were well positioned to jump in at this point. We've had PBS Learning Media around for a long time, and it was a matter of curating and getting the right resources out to the right communities at the right time. And I will say just very quickly, we've also had a huge influx of search queries and questions about how to teach race and racism. And so this has been a huge piece of sort of the current response is creating lesson plans, media collections for parents, teachers, coordinating with PBS Kids for Parents to put out resources for parents who really want to honestly talk to their children about race and racism. So I'll just say sort of in the current events realm, this has been a huge topic for us. Next slide, please. And we've also been providing educator support, specifically around this content. So we've had virtual professional learning for educators. So we've had distance learning work. We've had 66,000 educators participate in virtual learning opportunities since March, which is a lot for this audience. We've had over 1 million page views of our Teachers Lounge blog, which is really focused on distance learning and content about teaching race and racism. And we've created lots of webinars and resources and blog posts about these topics. Recently, a parents webinar that we did about talking to children about race and racism had 30,000 views just in the last week and a half. Next slide, please. And just really briefly, I want to talk about some resources we created with summer camp in mind. I know there are a lot of virtual camps and things happening right now. We have taken what previously were generally offered as in-person camp experiences through PBS member stations, and we've put them online. So they're available, they're designed around science and literacy development, around our content, Odd Squad and Rough Ruffman. And we built them to be sort of sequenced experiences that are sort of modular and flexible to be used in different contexts, including at home. They all come with activity plans, supporting materials, that kind of thing. And I'll run through the next one. Next slide, please. And we also have a whole series of collections around family and community learning, which is a multi-generational learning model around family engagement. So there are learning experiences that are constructed specifically for different generations to learn together. And again, this is around science and literacy development, and we developed them for community-based in-person settings, but they're available virtually for stations, district schools. We've shared them with CCSSO and other district and state resources, because they are really flexible and they're adaptable, and they're free and open and available for at-home usage. So next slide, please. Finally, I want to just talk about, we've been mentioning our member stations. We have over 330 of them in every corner of the country. And it's the beauty of the PBS system. It's this local national combination, this footprint that we have where we're creating content at the national level, but our stations are doing the majority of the work, getting this content into the hands of families and educators and communities. So I'm really pleased to turn it over to our public media colleagues. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Sarah. And yes, now we get to hear from our community commentator. So we just heard about the really important connection between national and local, and we've got several really great local stations represented today. So first I'd like to bring in Jamie Myers and Susie Grimm from SoCal PBS. And it's funny when you think about a local station because you guys are covering all of SoCal. So yes, it's local, but it's also pretty big. But we'd love to hear from you, your reflections on kind of what you heard from Sarah and Sarah in the sort of national perspective, but then also like thinking about equity. And if you could just tell us a little bit more about how you're framing public media as a partner for distance learning and how you approach this massive and successful partnership you have with the LA Unified School District. So I think Jamie, we'll start with you. Yeah.
Thanks, Emily. And thank you everyone for joining us. I'm super happy to be here today. I know many of us have had the moment of kind of how did all of this work happen in the last several months and how did it happen so quickly? I think we've had a lot of moments that I'm sure many of you on the call have thought about in the own work you're doing locally. So this partnership grew in about 7 days. I laugh every time I say it out loud to different people. We started At Home Learning as a call with Austin Butner, who's the superintendent of the Los Angeles Public Schools, to figure out what could we do? Is there anything we could partner on? Let's meet tomorrow morning and see what happens. And that next morning, as Sarah and Sarah shared, learning media as a resource grew into a place where we could map the scope and sequence happening in Los Angeles Unified over the next several months. And we were able to pretty quickly that day get in a room with all the curriculum instructors and make lines and connections between digital assets from learning media and standards that were happening in the classrooms in Southern California. And we were able to backdate that to a broadcast schedule. Luckily, in Los Angeles, we have the privilege of working with a number of partners, and the broadcast schedules were available on 3 different channels. So we had a 12-hour block of content for young children, many of the shows that Sarah and Sarah just shared, like Molly of Denali or Wild Kratts. We also had a K through 12 aligned block with content that was themed across K through 3, 4 through 8, and 9 through 12. And then we were able to use KCET to continually reinforce language arts, math, and science within the upper grades. And so this exciting partnership kind of grew. Next slide, please. And it started all from this idea of how could we serve families? It all came from an equity lens. I think in Los Angeles, about 1/4 of the children in LA Unified at the time did not have access to any broadband. And so this is pre-schools shutting down. And there was a concern, what could you connect with families? How could we work with families to bring those out? And we'll talk a little bit about the specific tools and resources as we go through right now, but wanted to give you a tad of background on kind of how it all came together. So this idea of aligned content to a broadcast schedule, and then we found ways to connect the digital resources for families that could experience it and could go online. But the biggest part of our work was that we wanted to make sure that it was free and it was available to everyone. This daily educational schedule was made in a parent-friendly format that you could actually download, and you could find ways to share. We worked with county offices of education and different districts to make sure that the broadcast schedule itself was available, so families, if they had a time during the day that they were looking to connect when distance learning wasn't happening, that they could find a show and watch together, or find a show and connect as a child maybe in some cases was working alone. All this corresponding content was then shared. You can see in the middle here what the curriculum schedule looked like. So every show was aligned to a specific subject area, and it was made in a really easy format. From an equity perspective, we saw that one of the best places we were able to outreach was actually through districts that were printing this schedule, and in many cases were distributing it at the food distribution centers for families. In addition to some of the other resources, toolkits, lesson plans, specific work that was actually put out in connection with that curriculum. What was exciting as the work kicked off is though on the slides you can see where PBS SoCal, KCET, and KLCS are in the LA region. Pretty quickly within the first 2 weeks, we were able to bring all the partners in the state of California on board. Everyone was using the broadcast schedule. everyone was sharing the digital resources through learning media, and we had full participation at the state level, which for those of you that are working on the campaign, I know how important that community kind of coalition is. And I think we felt that in this work as it grew and it's expanded over time. We also were able to put together both sort of flyers and resources for families in both English and Spanish that then were distributed across the state through county offices of ed, through the California State Superintendent's Organization, and in some cases through the individual curriculum-driven teacher resource organizations. Next slide. In addition to the broadcast, which we do know was an important part of the work from an equity perspective for children that didn't have access, we did launch a website called athomelearning.org. And this website in the first 6 weeks had over 300,000 page views. We went in and you can actually download that schedule that I just showed you, find content similar to the content that Sarah and Sarah were sharing that really focused on our local community. So, you know, tips for balancing school time closures, but for LA students or for Southern California students and what might be different, or how could parents in our market really connect with those families. We made daily routine guides where every hour on the hour you could find a digital activity or a printable activity that went along with the programming. And we worked with many local school districts to create sort of printable lesson plans in some cases that went out to schools so that teachers and students could be watching a program if they didn't have the opportunity to do distance learning and reflecting or answering questions or finding a way to sort of engage deeper with that learning within their household. Like PBS nationally, we launched a weekly newsletter to make sure that local teachers and local parents had resources. And in the first week we saw, as many of you have probably connected, people were looking for information. We saw a pretty big uptick in the number of subscribers. We were excited that there was a way that we could reach out, connect, and really support families as they went with that content. I think the most important part of the work was that it was done in partnership with the schools themselves. And so depending on what a school district or a school county office of education was looking for, we found ways to partner more deeply. And I know Susie will talk a little bit about sort of how deeply beyond the broadcast and beyond the digital, we were able to really connect with families on an individual level in our local community. I'm gonna throw back to Emily, throw to Susie.
So that is great. And then, so Susie, I wanted to ask you as well, you know, just kind of acknowledging that distance learning requires not only content, but context, as you're all kind of sharing, and how important the curation of online learning resources is important, and how important it is to map that to state standards. So what were your community partner and district's needs, and how did you support them with virtual and physical outreach to make sure that it was all aligned, that they needed it in the way they needed it to be?
Thank you, Emily. Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Susie. If you go to the next slide, please. I'll start talking about the educator resources. So as Jamie mentioned, we met with the LA Unified School District and we tried to plan everything within a week, and we did it. But I think what was really successful is that we partnered really closely with our instructional aides, and they help us really identify, do the resources from PBS Learning Media really match what their goals would be if they were not in school at the moment? Do the resources from PBS Kids match the early learning component? And as you all know, it turned out that they do match really well. That is one of the beauties of being part of the PBS system. There are standard aligns, they're aligned to the Head Start framing, to early learning goals, and it was a really easy task to do. And so when we were able to do that, we also did a local needs assessment in our communities with educators, and we sent a couple of surveys and we asked, what are you looking for? What kind of resources do you need? And a lot of them were just saying, we just need information. We just, you know, where can we find all these resources? What can we do? What are easy to do lesson plans that won't take them a lot of time to put together, because we are in the middle of a pandemic, and teachers have a lot of other things to worry about. So part of the things that we decided to do was to start weekly webinars. And I know Sarah Schapiro mentioned about there also the national webinars that I had in mind, and some of some of our local webinars took some of that content from the national component and we localize it for the Southern California communities. And so one of the things that we did, we really wanted it to match 4 components that LA Unified School District told us that they wanted it to really focus, which was ELA, which is English Learners Arts, math, science, and social studies. And so we really focus on those 4 contents, and then eventually we expanded to a little bit more. And so we really wanted it to make sure that we offer 30-minute introduction webinars, just dissemination of information. Here's where you can go to PBS Learning Media and find these resources. Here's where you can go to PBS Parents, PBS Kids, and this is some of the local content that we're putting together. And then we also put together 60-minute in-depth webinars based on those 4 learning goals that kind of help teachers, help parents replicate a little bit of education at home. A lot of them were worried that they didn't want parents to replicate the classroom in their homes. So we really wanted it to be mindful about that. That was going to be not something that was going to work, at least for the early learning community. And so we put together, we'll localize some of the national content and some of our content to really help teachers support families. So how can you put this activity together and share with your parents so that they feel comfortable doing it, and it's not so much about doing homework, quote unquote. And so we try to identify activities that could be replicated maybe by doing the laundry and how to count or sort clothes, right? Maybe by cooking. There was a Peg plus Cat activity, which Peg plus Cat focuses on math, and they had a food-based activity. And we utilize that to say, if you're gonna be cooking at home because you're going through this pandemic, here are a couple of things that you can do with math or that you can help with your educators. And so it was really, really great, a success to do. If you go to the next slide, we had a couple of educators from all over Orange County, LA County, San Bernardino, as well as a couple of other states, which was really surprising to see. We have people from Puerto Rico, Canada, all the way to New Zealand joining us at whatever time they could to really join and learn more about this content and these resources. And I think Sarah DeWitt and Sarah Schapiro mentioned this, but everything that we do at PBS is free. So when they go to PBS Learning Media, they don't have to pay for anything. It's completely free when they come to our local stations as well. All the resources, all the content, even the apps, they don't have to pay for some of them. So I think there was a lot of interest in that. And we got really great feedback from educators from LA Unified School District as well as other counties telling us how much, you know, having 30-minute webinars was really helpful for them because they felt a little bit lost and they didn't know what to do, to really enjoying the 60-minute webinars and wanting more to do that. So right now, Jamie and I are in phase 2 of COVID-19 rapid response, and we're trying to figure it out. How do we create a hybrid model to continue to support our local educators, since that is one of the major needs as we are thinking going back to school in the fall. How do we, you know, integrate blended learning, distance learning to really support this community that we're faced to use technology, and some of this community is a little bit apprehensive. So we're really trying to think deeply and thoughtfully about supporting this. And then if you go to the next slide, we also, one of the things that we did for families, we also wanted to make sure that we were supporting families. So we hosted also kind of mini needs assessment, virtual parents and family town halls, virtual workshops. And in the fall and next month in July, we're going to be piloting virtual summer camps to Sarah Shapiro's point, mentioning those virtual camps as a local station. We're going to be doing that in the community and utilizing that national content to really localize and supporting our families in LA and Orange County. But one of the things that was really interesting for us, a lot of our community partners that we work with in Southern California reach out to us and say, you know, a lot of our families don't have access to Wi-Fi. They do have a cell phone and they have a data, but they don't know how to access a computer without a Wi-Fi. Obviously, they cannot go to a Starbucks and use that Wi-Fi, or they cannot go to a coffee place and use that internet access. So one of the things that we were already doing was distributing actual physical toolkits in the community. There are backpacks full of resources like books, lesson plans, or easy to do activities, and they're both in English and Spanish. And so we wanted to continue to do that for those families. And one of the things that we did for this case, we really wanted it to be intentional. We really wanted it to target those families that did not have access at all. So we work in partnership with some of the LA Unified School District teachers, as well as their local partners, to help us identify who are those families that absolutely cannot go online and print the activity. So print a blog article or download an app. And we were able to do that. So we partner with them to distribute this in their Go and Grab food size. And as you can see in the photo, a backpack with resources, highlighting some of the national PBS KIDS content, but as well as some of the local content that we do, and buying that book that, we wanted it to continue to do for them. And a lot of them, as you can see, sent us photos that they were doing the activities, that they were excited that they had this opportunity to do this. And so that was a really great feedback back then. Between March and May, we distributed about 3,000 toolkits. We usually do 1,000 backpacks a year. That's one of our yearly goals, but because of the rapid response that we did in this pandemic, we distributed 3,000 total between those months. And so right now we're in phase 2 of this rapid response to COVID-19, and we're prepping for toolkits for the summer and continue to support those families that might need those resources. One of the other things that we did was partner with CPB and Bright by Text to offer a text service. Again, a lot of those families have data, but they don't have access to internet. So Bright by Text offers, quick activities to do at home, resources that they might be able to log in through their data cell phone or look at those activities, as well as local information that we have. So inviting families to your student parent virtual academies, to your virtual camps, to your educator webinars. So this has been really successful. I don't have the data yet, how many parents we have registered, but a lot of the feedback that we have gotten for community partners so far has been great, to be able to provide one more resource for those families that don't have access at all to internet. And then next slide. One of the things that I just wanted to mention was that I know there's a lot of communities here local that might want to replicate these resources, and so we're excited. We would love to have a conversation with you. There's going to be a Q&A at the end, but here's a couple of websites as well as our email if you're interested in doing this work or partnering with our local station. We do cover several counties throughout Southern California, so we'll be interested in partnering with you all. And then I'll pass it back to Emily.
Thank you so much, Susie and Jamie. That was amazing. So much good work going on with LA Unified School District and then in Southern California in general. We really appreciated hearing about that. And I wanted to make a quick note before I kind of head a little east to Texas, but wanted to remind everybody, if you do have a question, if you could please post it in the Q&A versus the chat, because that way we can keep them really well organized and queue them up when we get to that portion of the webinar. So please post your questions in the Q&A. So now I'd like to invite Kierstan Schwab of Texas PBS into the conversation. I know that you've done a lot of work with Texas GLR communities, so we'd love to hear about that and about the Start Smart Texas. If you could tell us a little bit about the types of organizations that are part of this work and how an organization locally may be able to join in. Kierstan?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Emily. I'm excited to be a part of this. Yes, Texas PBS represents all of the PBS stations in Texas, and we are a statewide lead in the campaign. So kind of wearing two hats as I address this audience here today. I wanted to give a shout out to my partner, co-lead, Adriana Cuellar, who represents the United Ways of Texas, and we've teamed up to provide a coalition across the state around early learning and really trying to work to get kids reading on grade level. And so this was an excellent opportunity to bring communities together. And we've done so under the banner of Start Smart Texas. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But as you can see from the slide, these are the communities that are currently members of the campaign and part of our coalition. And we have 4 new communities we hope that will be joining us very soon. Can you go to the next slide, please? Susie talked a little bit about Bright by Text, but Bright by Text has also been a central organizing strategy for us in Texas, and we've done this as a coalition. We have more than 16,000 families that have subscribed to Bright by Text, and that service offers early learning activities, as Susie said, and other tips that are designed specifically for your child's age. And so it's really been a great resource in Texas. We've also used this resource to push out COVID resources. So because the platform allows you to put out messages on a national basis, but it also allows you to segment these by zip code. So we can provide local resources down to the zip code. And we have done so in many cases. And in addition to that, we continue to work with state agency partners to provide state level messages that talk about stress, managing stress, which is important for parents at this time. And we continue to grow and expand the network. Can you go to the next slide, Jerry? I'm going to abbreviate this part really quickly because you learned a lot about this partnership, but we are really grateful to the folks at SoCal for the hard work that they did putting together this service that we also, all of the Texas stations provided programming geared towards specific grade levels and designed with input from our local school districts around the needs for continuing learning as kids were at home. Can you go to the next slide? A real important piece of this to emphasize is we often say that Texas is a big state, but as you can see from this slide, our geography really encompasses more than the geography of more than 9 other states. So we are providing this network out in large areas, in many areas, in rural communities. And we found in talking with superintendents and our education agency that the number of kids that are without service, and particularly broadband service in rural areas, is striking. And so having this television service where every child has access and it's free, really, in the words of one superintendent, was a godsend. Next slide, please. The other thing that we learned through this partnership is was really a concern that our state partners brought up at the Texas Education Agency, and that is, as many of you know and are concerned about the learning loss that we anticipate given these months that children were not in the classroom. And what was particularly concerning to us, as you can see from this research, was mathematics skills, and how could we use our resources to really hone in on a strategy around providing math instruction while kids were at home. And so next slide. What we've done for the summer is really focus in on this math need. And so we have been working with the Dallas Independent School District, and they have identified master teachers that are going to be providing 15-minute teacher-led lessons from grades kindergarten through grade 8, and even in Algebra 1 for kids that are a little advanced. We are going to be providing that for 2.5 hours daily in a block And that starts in July. So we look forward to maybe coming back and sharing with you what we've learned as a part of this pilot. But what we hope to determine is how we can provide this kind of pinpointed need-based resources throughout our state if indeed we find ourselves in a situation where kids need to stay at home during certain intervals throughout the school year. Next slide. And I think I'll turn it over to you, Emily.
Thank you so much, Kierstan. And we're going to keep this on going. We're moving even further east across the US, and I'm going to welcome Debbie Stack into the conversation from the WCNY. And I know you all took a little bit of a different response based on your community's needs. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and how you guys are working in Syracuse, New York area?
Yes, thank you very much. It's great to be with all of you today. We're headquartered in Syracuse, New York, yet we serve 19 counties. But Syracuse is interesting. We faced the digital divide very quickly as the pandemic was breaking. Over 7,000 students in the Syracuse City School District alone did not have broadband access. And with the county spreads as well, we very quickly get into rural areas, and they also did not have that service. We were thrilled. Again, I can't thank PBS SoCal enough. We had jumped right on the at-home learning and programmed our primary channel with that, but we really felt compelled to do something about all these children who could not take advantage of their classroom online learning. So we met with the Syracuse City School District on March 12th to brainstorm. March 18th, we agreed we were going to create the TV Classroom Network. We were going to turn over one of our channels and have Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 teachers featuring teacher lessons. So we had teachers start to come in on March 23rd, and they would record 30-minute lessons in key subject areas, live to tape. So not a lot of time to do any sort of editing. It was pre-K through 12. We had a real concern about early childhood learning and being afraid that they were going to be left out of the mix. So we made sure in some ways to address that. And on March 30th, our TV Classroom Network went live. Next slide, please. So that was 45 hours of pre-K through 12 programming. And it was really amazing. The teachers came in. This was right at, we launched right at the height of the pandemic. Schools had closed. And there was concern about coming into a studio. Our own staff was worried, we're going to be spreading the virus, but everyone really persevered. And it was a really great pulling together of the community. Some of the other school districts in the area jumped on to provide some teachers. The mayor of Syracuse. And interestingly enough, a number of funders actually approached us. They had been very concerned about the idea that there would be kids who could not engage with their teachers in the classroom. So they encouraged us to apply for grants, and every single one that encouraged us to do that did indeed give us some financial support. Also, it was an amazing thing. Sometimes PBS World, perceived obviously as a network, our commercial media all jumped on board, and they were really great about publicizing that this was available to students and families. And we even had a billboard company contact us, and they put up 3 billboards at their own expense around the area, advertising TV Classroom, tune in, that sort of thing. So we had amazing, certainly, partners. The Syracuse City School District was our curriculum partner. They were the experts, and every week, really, the schedule changed somewhat as they were getting feedback from teachers and also from parents, seeing what was going on in the online lessons, and also talking with parents and families at the meals, the nutrition centers that they were staffing. So teachers they were swamped, but they stepped right up. They prepared their lessons. They delivered PowerPoints 48 hours in advance of when they were going to be coming into the studio. They got used to the camera representing their students, talking to the cameras. And we had some local places like educators from our local zoo and nature center. Syracuse University, their Dean of Education taught math lessons. The National Reading League, who's headquartered in Syracuse, they started, which we were very excited about, a phonics-based reading instruction. So there was a lesson every day, again, to address that early childhood audience. Next slide, please. So you're going to see just 1 week of programming on this particular schedule. No 2 weeks truly were the same. We were flying so quickly, developing things, but we had a commitment. We at least wanted to get into every Friday was a dual language story time, for example. ENL tried to do weekly, ELA tried to do an ENL lesson every week as well. So you can see that we had a variety, kind of a combination, a little bit of PBS programming. For example, there'd be a science lesson, and then we try to align a nature or a NOVA or some other PBS content to the particular lesson. We have New York State Regents, so we had New York State Regents prep, even though the Regents got canceled. The content was so good for high school students. We had partners step forth like Huntington Learning Center, who did 5 SAT, ACT prep classes that they taught coming in. And then some partners that were derived from the school district, for example, Great Minds Organization, which is a group of teachers providing lessons in math, science, and ELA. We just used the math, again, to the point that was being made. Math was a very big concern among the curriculum experts, so we really ended up with a fair amount of math in there. It was a great way to add some different content. We live streamed TV Classroom and posted programs for on demand, because we quickly found out that even if families did have internet access, sometimes they didn't have enough devices, so their 3rd grader might be watching TV Classroom while their 6th grader was using the tablet to interface with the classroom. And the teachers themselves, in printed packets that they sent home to students, were aligning activities to what was being shown on TV Classroom. We kept our 24/7 PBS Kids channel, so we were so committed to that. So we actually had 3 channels of television that were pretty much dedicated to education. We had a Stay Connected portal where we could put things like sign up for the PBS Kids newsletter. Here's where you can find the apps. Something that was very easy for people to find, kind of one-stop shopping. Teachers could find PBS learning resources organized by subject matter. Signing up for Bright by Text, we utilize Bright by Text as well. We had some coronavirus, COVID-19 tips, including working with 100 Black men, an organization in our community, because of the disproportionate number of African Americans being affected by COVID-19. So we had health spots in regards to that. We stopped our broadcast June 12th. The school year's technically ended. But we are organizing now for the summer, having probably a summer schedule of 3 days a week, not starting as early as 8 o'clock in the morning though, letting the kids sleep in a little bit. We'll incorporate some new broadcasts. And last slide there, on our TV Classroom website, we have surveys. For both teachers and educators. We were promoting those with promos, sending them out via the school districts in our region, and also a survey for parents. And Syracuse University is taking a deep dive with some families within the Syracuse City School District to really take a look at the different forms of learning, including TV Classroom, and the impact that has made for their children and getting their suggestions too about the future. So, a lot. It was amazing to do this, really responding to a community need. And we got wonderful videos of parents showing their kids exercising with the health and wellness class on TV Classroom. Just great feedback as far as anecdotal feedback. I think we had the confidence to do this because we have the PBS network at our backs, and we just we're used to, I think, as a network, as PBS local stations, to really trying to address local needs. So we're excited to work with our teachers, parents, and families, and that will continue right on. We do expect, it's been mentioned before, that probably the fall will include some remote learning. So we'll be ready to go.
Wow, thank you, Debbie, and thank you. And there's one quick question that just came in. If you could let us know what the start date is for your summer programming.
We're going to start, it looks like the week of the July 13th, after the 4th of July. So it looks like we'll do that and go right through to Labor Day.
Great, thank you. So thanks to all of you. We have a ton of questions and we're going to do our best to get through them all. And I want to encourage everybody, if you haven't yet, to please post your question in the Q&A box. Again, if you put it in the chat, much easier. The only way that we're going to capture it is if you put it in Q&A, because that's how we kind of get things lined up. So the first question, we actually have similar questions from both Gustavo Mendez and Lynette Marshall about language access. If you could talk a little bit about, and maybe we could start with Sarah, a little bit about how you're making programming available in different languages, and specifically Spanish language programming, which used to be available, like Plaza Sesamillo, the Spanish version of Sesame Street, used to be available through Univision, but it no longer is. So if you could talk a little bit about any way to address that, and any long-term goals in creating PBS Kids Digital in Spanish and other languages.
Sure, I'm happy to kick off. This is Sarah DeWitt. This is a dream of ours, is to offer more content in Spanish, and it's something that our stations definitely are clamoring for as well. And it's like Plaza Sesamo is actually not distributed by PBS. That's straight from Sesame Workshop. And so we are actively working with our producers to try to get more of the Spanish track available, so we at least can offer that additional audio track. And we we're actively working towards trying to get more. It's a financial thing, trying to get more of the shows available. I will say on PBS Kids Digital, the way that we are trying to focus our translation resources right now is on the parents' audience. Through our partnership with the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Ready to Learn grant from the Department of Ed, we've had lots of conversations with parents who recommended that we prioritize translating first the content for parents into Spanish, that if we could only start in one place, start there. So that's where we're actively working right now, to try to translate as much as we can for parents. And Schapiro, I know there's more happening on the educator side.
Yeah, I would just quickly say, just to add to what Sarah was saying, is that it's of course the goal to translate as much as we can into Spanish. We have an amazing new team member, fairly new team member, who's been doing some translation for us and translated our COVID response collection into Spanish, and is going sort of resource by resource across our PBS Learning Media site to really prioritize Spanish language translation. And then, like Sarah said, we are working through, in partnership with CPB to think about larger translation needs.
And I don't know if there are any of our stations who want to add on to that. I know that some folks are able to do some more things locally.
Yeah, I would just add that you can search PBS Learning Media for specific Spanish language resources, and that's a great tool. We know that Texas teachers often use that mechanism to find what we have that's available in both languages.
Yeah, and at PBS SoCal, one of the ways that we're trying to address that challenge too is making sure that we're translating everything that we do, from activities to lesson plans. And we are working on a family math project, and we're taking that approach to be a Spanish first for video content too. So we really try to make sure that locally we are providing that. We are in Los Angeles, which tends to be, I think, 90.3% Latino Hispanic families. So we do want to take that approach, and we want to make sure that we're serving that approach. And even when we do our local service direct workshops, or when we were doing the in-person workshops and the educator trainings, we used to translate the actual, we used to take clips or screenshots of the resources from the content from the shows and translate that and provide those handouts to families, so they knew what the show was talking about, and they knew that it was educational.
I
A lot of the,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
The family community learning workshops that Sarah S. talked about, we have offered many of those facilitated in Spanish as well, so that we can have these conversations with more families, as well as the PBS Kids for Parents Play and Learn apps. Those all are in English and in Spanish. Go ahead, Sarah.
And I was just going to say, we've been also experimenting with educational outreach in Spanish. So we did our first fully Spanish language webinar for educators, which was an amazing thing. And a lot of educators who joined were not Spanish speakers. And so they were sort of experiencing the jarring, experience of being in a space where they didn't understand everything that was going on. And it gave them great empathy for the students in their classrooms who don't speak English as a first language. So it was a really interesting experience, and we're going to continue experimenting with that format and doing more educational outreach in Spanish.
Thank you very much. And another question about kind of the access to resources. This is from Cynthia Grace Devine Kepner. Do you have resources or content to support special education students, parents, and families, and especially with that idea around digital learning? Why don't I go to Sarah DeWitt first? Yeah.
We do. Again, I like the Spanish question. I wish we had more. And this is something that we have been trying to think about ways we could do some partnerships to offer more supports. I will say that we are very committed to accessibility across PBS Kids content. We have, I mentioned those learning frameworks. We have another framework that's focused on universal design for learning, thinking specifically about children who might have learning disabilities or are visually or hearing impaired, and how the games can be altered so that they can access more of them and play more of them. That's more about what we're doing for kids. And Sarah, do we have things on learning media?
We do have things on learning media. So we have resources for teachers, special education teachers. Again, I would say in the sort of wish list of things we wish we had more of, this is a gap for us in terms of how much support we have on learning media. But and I would say too, some of our like Daniel Tiger has a character who there are different characters throughout our children's programming that addresses students, that includes students who have different needs. So that is some of the ways that we've thought about it for kids, is to just normalize the experience of seeing kids who look or have different needs than other children, or other characters in this case. But I would say generally we have some resources, could have more.
Any other thoughts from our local stations?
There's several stations. WCNY is one that's part of a new initiative called Move to Include. And we're going to be developing content for PBS Learning Media, cited around children with disabilities. We're also, month of July is Americans with Disabilities Act 30th anniversary. So the stations are doing intensive programming, including production of local programming. It doesn't meet, this is children with disabilities or up to adults with disabilities. It doesn't touch the full gamut of special needs, but trying to, I think that Sarah summed it up, you know, there's some, but not anywhere where we would like it to be. And it's really seen as something that we need to address.
Great, thanks to all of you. Our next question is from Ayla Fortune. And I think you all touched on this a little bit, but she would like to know a little bit more about the specific tools, resources, and content for children aged 0 to 8 focus on race and racism.
This is Sarah S. I can jump in here for a minute and then pass it to whomever. There are a ton of resources on PBS Kids for parents that we've put together for parents around having honest conversations about race and racism and different tools and resources. So we can send that link around to the group. We also have content and collections on PBS Learning Media that are not exactly 0 to 8, so targeted towards an older audience for teachers who are looking to tackle this subject and really do it thoughtfully. And we also, as we mentioned, had a parent webinar that included a lot of resources that, you know, I think I said about 30,000 parents came, and we'll continue to do, we're going to do a larger virtual professional learning series for educators around these issues. But I'll pause there.
If I can add here, there's an effort to identify resources that local stations have developed around these issues, both for a children's audience, but also more of a general audience. And in Texas, we've identified over 100 resources that specifically look at issues of equity, issues of race, and inequalities, as well as issues around policing. And so we hope to use this kind of effort to develop this, this curated group of resources to work with PBS to add some of these to PBS Learning Media, and also to make these available online through the PBS Video app.
And I just also want to add that locally, we are addressing racist and anti-racist education and equity through our editorials. So we're working with a lot of Black educators to elevate those voices and to highlight those voices. So we're working with them to write articles about anti-racist education and equity, and how to help families finding books. We are hosting a webinar on July 7 with a local panel in Los Angeles about how do we start from the beginning for early childhood, and how do we really talk to your little ones about anti-racism. So locally, I think a lot of us are trying to do our best to really address this topic.
Thank you all. And I just wanted to share a comment from Lynette Marshall, who says the equity lens has been at the core of PBS programming for decades before it was identified as such. This is so clearly still the case. Thank you all for opening up and offering so much opportunity and access for children and families all over the US. So that was not a question, but just a supporting comment to everything that you all just shared. So here's a question, an interesting question, even though most of our participants today are focused on early learning, but here's a question that you mentioned about students in high school. So if you could share a little bit about the type of response you had for those students accessing the content, and what's it required of them from what you know.
I guess I'll jump in for the TV classroom because we were working with teachers and offered high school content. We learned very quickly to offer it later in the day versus earlier in the day. And in some cases, some teachers were requiring taking a look at the content or participating in it, including the at-home learning channel content as well as TV classroom. And for others, there weren't those kinds of assignments. So it really seemed, I think, again, because this all happened so quickly, and how do you address this in high schoolers by virtue of age, seem to have a little bit more of free will. So I think there was some level of challenge. But what was interesting is the most calls that got forwarded to me were from high school students who were worried about upcoming exams. They didn't know for sure if they were going to happen or not, and what could I recommend, and when were we going to air the biology program again, would we consider doing it? And we took those all very seriously and really tried to address them, because we were seeing some consistency in the questions. So the high school audience was an interesting audience, though, to try to wrap our mind around.
Great, thank you so much. Were there other?
Yeah, I was just going to say, from the learning media perspective, you know, a majority of our audience is really educators and now families of students 6 through 12 grade. So we did see, and that uptick in traffic that we talked about earlier, we do think is really very much about actually students logging in themselves. So we did see, it wasn't, you know, we don't know exactly how these materials were integrated into teachers' lessons, but we do know that students were driving up the overall traffic to learning media. And so we're seeing greater engagement of students themselves logging into the platform.
Great, thank you so much. And sorry, quick question for Susie and Jamie. I know we shared at the beginning of the call that at least 12 million students do not have access to broadband, but you all shared, Alba Bautista, remember that you shared a statistic in Southern California about how many families have no access. Could you just state that again?
I think if I'm recalling correctly, I think Jamie shared the LA Unified School District a statistic, which is about 27% of their families, they have 700,000 children in that district, and 27% of them do not have access to Wi-Fi. And then locally with our community partners, I don't have a statistic. It was just a matter to identify who was those families. So working with a Head Start, they let us know that in their classroom, out of 10 families, 2 of them do not have access to Wi-Fi. So we don't have any specific statistic, but at the district level was 27% of them do not have any access whatsoever.
Thank you. Yeah, it's almost more interesting to hear it from that perspective. So thank you for that. And so another question from Pam Johnson: as the pandemic continues and schools, families need to evolve and change, what are the panelists being asked to do next, both locally and nationally? I think you've all touched on that a little bit, thinking about the return to school, whatever that's going to look like, but you could share a little bit about kind of what's next.
They're asking for a lot. so we're in rapid, I think I mentioned this, we're still in like phase 2 of rapid response for COVID-19 and the pandemic. One of the things locally that we noticed a lot in partnership with LA Unified School District and LACO, which is the Los Angeles County Department of Education in Orange County, a lot of them are really looking into how do we support educators. And Jamie has been having a lot of statewide conversations with the governor's office and as well as the California Department of Education. And their 3 main priorities, or 2 of their main priorities, are bilingual families, bilingual and immigrant families, and early learning educators for the state of California. So they really want that community to be supported. And Jamie and I right now are sort of in brainstorming mode about how do we continue to support them, whether it is a hybrid model, it is a distance learning. So currently right now we're doing a lot of research on what the literature is saying about distance learning for early learning educators. There's not literature, there's a lot of recommendations, so there's no research because, as you know, that demographic, it's a little bit different with that kind of demographic. I think Debbie spoke about, and Sarah Schapiro spoke about a high schooler being able to go to PBS Learning Media, log in, take classes, you know, and be, you know, quote unquote, easy for them. But for a preschooler, for a kindergarten kid, is very different. So we're trying to figure it out, what the research is saying, what the literature is saying, what the recommendations are saying, and what can we as PBS SoCal do in partnership with LACO and LA Unified School District to really support those teachers. But it is mostly about what is the school if there's a school, will look like for distance learning, for blended learning, and what can we do as public media to continue to support that. And through the summer, we're going to continue the schedule that we provided. So there'll still be broadcasts online aligned to a specific California standard goals, to Head Start framing, early learning. But I think our priority for phase 2 is going to be educators for us. How do we really support that community?
And I'd like to add, I think one of the things that we drew on from our history is really working to empower parents. And I think that's a real important ethic that we all share. And I think what we really tried to message as we communicated within the programs, but also in between, was parents, you've got this. We know this is tough for everybody, but we want you to know that you're essential to your child's learning. And we hope that that experience that parents received through this COVID, when schools were closed, that parents really got that message and appreciated their teachers more, but also that they feel more empowered to be a partner in their child's learning.
I would echo what Kierstan says. The schools told us we've got it, primarily in terms of we're supporting our teachers, we're giving them extra tech training, we're doing whatever in that regard, but it's the parents, and that's who we were hearing from too, and who we were getting questions for. So although we will continue to support educators, that's where we were really going, was what we were hearing from the community. And it was a lot about how to, that direct contact with parents and their students, and families were calling us with questions.
Thank you. And if you haven't noticed, we did just post our poll. So if you, as our speakers are still answering questions, if you could just quickly take a few minutes to complete our poll, it would help us a lot. So go ahead. I'm sorry, I don't know who was, I just cut off. Sarah?
It was one of the Sarahs, multiple Sarahs. I was just going to say, we at PBS National are working on what kinds of supports we can be offering into the fall, because the PBS SoCal, Texas PBS, WCNY, all of these stations have done such a huge amount of work and did it so quickly. So, sort of what can we be doing to support at-home learning into the fall by helping with the schedule, helping with the curriculum alignment and mapping, both in the early childhood level, but also as we think about grades 9 through 12, or 6 through 12 rather, just thinking about what we can be doing to further support the needs that we think, unfortunately are going to be continuing into the fall. So we're working and sharing some ideas with stations, and then looking to launch some further support in the fall.
Thank you. And then Susie, one question for you. Somebody had asked about registering for your webinars. Can you talk about how that works?
So I can share the link. I apologize. I was trying to get it as people were talking. So give me 1 second and I'll share that with all of you.
Thank you. And then just as a last question for everybody, and I think Debbie touched on this a little bit, but if you could talk a little bit more about what you know about how your resources are being accessed and how that relates to where families do or do not have broadband, and any kind of evaluation you're doing, and to demonstrate how your resources are being used and accessed.
Well, I know I touched on it, but one of the challenging things again was this was happening so quickly. It's not easy to do pre and post, for example, which is often a typical thing. So we're real interested and pleased that Syracuse University got into this to do some more in-depth focus group with families, things like that, to see what we can learn. Our own surveys are indeed showing some things. There was there's a nice comment section, and we're getting a lot of comments, which we will assemble and try to learn from. And certainly we are trying to, as we look ahead, build in evaluation where we can right on the front end. But what was the biggest surprise, I think, to us was that the numbers were far larger than was expected of kids without broadband access, and the struggles of families, even when they had the technology, to utilize it. And teachers were telling us that they were spending, certainly in the early weeks, almost as much time working with parents and trying to get them situated with the technology than they were teaching kids. So that's something to keep in mind, and we're trying to see if maybe we can help with that.
Thank you, Debbie. Anything from the National PBS about how you're evaluating, tracking usage?
Well, we definitely, we know already that we over-index with lower income kids and kids who don't have access to broadband. That's really why we deliver the way we do. We don't have numbers just from the last few months yet, but that's something that we expect we'll be able to get kind of as we are able to sort through the content, sort through like kind of our Nielsen numbers and things like that soon. I will say that, you know, just the huge jumps in usage have been really notable to us. Just feeling like we're reaching a lot of kids in a moment where they just really needed something quickly.
Thank you. And I think that's all our questions. And so we're at 4:29 here in Washington, D.C. on the East Coast. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Sarah and Sarah and Jamie and Susie and Debbie and Kierstan. This has been an incredible discussion, incredible presentation. Thank you so much. And I encourage all of you, thank you to all of our participants today too for the great questions and the sharing in the chat. That has been really sort of a great way to make Zoom interactive. So we really appreciate that. And we do encourage you to register for our future webinars. We have 2 already posted on the screen, but there will be many more throughout the month of July and August through the whole summer. So again, you can count on it every Tuesday at 3 p.m. In some cases, some weeks we also have webinars at 12:30. So the link that's been shared for registration to our webinars, you can find out about all the upcoming webinars there. So thanks to everybody for your time today, for your participation. Thanks again to our speakers, our stellar panelists, and we look forward to seeing you soon on our next GLR Learning Tuesday.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.